So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to our panel tonight about the natural gas crisis and the question how quickly can we restore energy security, and does the crisis promote or maybe hinder the path to climate neutrality? And I would like to discuss that. I put the names around the gas bubbles in the North Sea above the Nord Stream pipeline. So I would like to discuss that and welcome our panelists. And I start with those who are the farthest way here, with Professor Felipe Feixão from Chile. Then I would like also to welcome Professor Paul Alberg Østergaard from Denmark. And finally, I think everybody knows our president, Professor Neven Dojic from Croatia. And unfortunately, we do not only have a gas crisis, we also have a panelist crisis, because we also had been planning with Professor Christian Cristofari from Corse in France, but I think he did not appear so far at the conference. So we have gas and panelists lacking. So I would like to introduce, and we would like to discuss a bit our personal views to the crisis. Maybe we can face them in the future. And I give a short introduction to my thoughts that I have had in the last weeks and months. So first of all, I have seen that as an energy availability crisis or a gas availability crisis. But when I look from my country perspective of view, we mainly use natural gas for heating and not for industry or electricity generation. So almost every second household in my country is using natural gas to heat the houses. And that's a large majority of our gas usage. And then, of course, we use it also in industry to heat buildings, and also in other businesses to heat buildings. And yes, there is also for production purposes in industry and also a bit for electricity generation, but the majority is definitely we just burn the gas to have hot or warm houses. And then I was so optimistic, and maybe I also was naive, because I thought we are talking about this climate crisis since decades, but everything goes so slow, the crisis is not really feelable that much. And we have seen in the pandemic crisis how fast we can act, and now we have a second or third crisis, and that was due to the war of Russia and Ukraine, and the gas crisis that resulted from them. And I think now we have another really tremendous crisis, and maybe that could unique the two crises, the climate crisis and the gas crisis, and what we act then going for energy transition much more fast. But I think I was very wrong. So what I really thought was, when I remember when I was a boy, in the 1970s, and I remember my grandma's kitchen that looked a bit like that, and in her house in winter it was always cold. There was only the kitchen where they had a warm room, and I thought, yes, okay, now in the gas crisis, we just do not heat our houses, or maybe only the kitchen or only the living room, and then we can easily handle that crisis. But I was completely wrong. People do not want to go back to a single warm room in their buildings. They only complain, they want subsidies, and they want more subsidies. The government should solve all the problem. And then I thought maybe even heating one room could be too much. And I thought, isn't there a smarter way? So what's that one here? That is one of you. So that cube is one of you, and when I assume it's maybe you, weight of 70 kilogram, or you a weight of 70 kilogram, then that cube, and I assume you are mostly consisting of water, then it's a volume of 0.07 cubic meter. And we want to heat that 0.07 cubic meter cube to 37 degrees Celsius. At least the core of the cube. Even the surface is much cooler. And to do that, then we have something different. We have a lot of cubes, more than 1,000 of cubes. And what we do to heat that body of 37 degrees Celsius, we heat a lot of cubes of them to, let's say, 23 degrees Celsius. And for that, we burn a lot of natural gas just to keep that. And when I take the average German resident living on a 47.7 square meter living space, and I assume a height of the room of 2.7 meters, and then we have an equivalent of 1,840, the volume of a single body that we heat up to, let's say, 20, 23, 24 degrees, depending on who is heating. And that should be possible to do that in a much smarter way. So this year I asked my students to develop also crazy ideas. Please give me more smarter proposal how to heat this single small cube here in the left lower side. And I'm sure that's possible. And then I also would like, so that was a disappointment. We do not reach that. Even I was failing in my own family, living with my wife and 2 daughters. When we had this first cold week in October, when I think they almost killed me with their eyes when I didn't start the heating system in our house. And then people always make jokes about long German words. And now there is a new word. And even my German skills go to the limit to understand that word here. So the word is, and that's really a new one, and I cannot remember, I really need to read it. It's the Kurzfrist-Energieversorgungssicherungsmaßnahmenverordnung. And what is behind that is a new ordinance that more or less asks all the public bodies to save this winter 20% of energy. And in my university, I'm responsible to do that. And every measure I do, and the team is doing, we have a lot of complaints. Even the simplest measures, people are not willing to do that or to follow those. So it's also a disappointment. But then I say we also have an energy cost crisis and the people cannot afford any more heating, but there's really a good news because everybody can choose his or her own tariff for the heating. So we have those practical tariff valves. So you go to the left side and then you have a cheap tariff, or you go to complete right side and then you have an expensive energy tariff for heating. And then instead of going for the energy transition now and facing the heating crisis, like Maria Grassa this morning said, we need a 4% of at least renovation of buildings every year. What are so politicians doing, or what is those people? They look to be very happy. They look to be as they are in deep love. But it's not the case. The left one is the Vice Prime Minister of Canada, I think also responsible for finance, and the right one is our German Chancellor, and they here are just meeting to negotiate on new natural gas deliveries, and in the midterm also on green hydrogen deliveries. Or we have from the Green Party, our ministry, who is responsible for energy, and he is driving and flying around the world to look for new natural gas possibilities. And so we are at the moment swapping the autocrats. We're going from Putin to other, maybe not so prosperous countries. And so what I would like to do together with the panelists and also with all the audience here, so whether the gas crisis from our national perspectives and how the people and the governments react on it or don't react on that, I would like to discuss with you and with the panelists if the gas crisis is accelerating the energy transition toward renewables and climate neutrality, or is it maybe the opposite? Do we make a shift backwards, for example, to coal? And what is the future? Is it maybe hydrogen derivatives from all over the world? So thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Filippi. We start with the one who had the longest trip here to discuss with us. Thank you very much.
is working. So when I go forward, it doesn't. Oh, there we go. Okay, I think it's working. It's working now. Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Ingo, for the invitation. So my name is Felipe Feijóo. I'm a professor at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso in Chile. Today I'm not going to talk about Europe, I'm going to talk about Chile. And the experience we had in the past about a similar natural gas crisis, or in general energy crisis we suffered a couple of decades ago. So basically I want to put my perspective, my ideas on what we did right and what we did wrong, and basically what we are doing now to face the current crisis. So as a little bit of history, this is the historical electricity generation mix in Chile back from the 70s until 27. So if we see here, from 1971 all the way up to probably 1995, Chile generated most of the electricity based on hydro. Okay, 90 or around 70 to 85% of the electricity historically has been generated by hydro-based electricity. So the problem with this is that it's common for us in Chile, based on the geography that we have, to have dry years. So every 10 years we normally have 2 or 3 very dry years. And that's been happening since the 70s. Okay, so it's not something that's been happening only now, it's been happening for a long time. So what we did, basically the Chilean government said we need to face this problem, because every time we have a dry year, then the next year we suffer basically shortages of electricity. And back in 1999 or 1999, luckily for us, basically Argentina said, hey, we now have very cheap natural gas. Okay? So we said, okay, let's start bringing some supply from Argentina. So we built some pipelines. And as you can see here in the plot, I don't know if you can see the mouse here, there we go. Back in the 1995, 1997, all the gas that basically is coming into power generation is coming from Argentina. We basically maybe supply from Chile 10% of the gas that was basically being used for electricity generation. So most of this gas was basically produced, basically coming from Argentina. But what's the problem with this? So on one side we have a lot of dry years for affecting hydro generation. On the other side, we have lack of supply, like national supply. So we were highly dependent on external resources, basically external fossil fuels. So that was the second mistake that we did. So we basically didn't care about energy independence. We were only focusing on trying to meet the demand at that time. So what happened? As we can see here, in 2004, on the plot on the right, in 2004, natural gas consumption started to decline. By why this happened? This basically happened because Argentina suddenly said in 2004, we have an energy crisis ourselves. We have an economic crisis. We put some tariff on some fuels, and we're going to shut down all the supply back to Chile. So suddenly, within 4 years, we were having basically a lot of electricity generation from natural gas sources. The Chilean government arguing against the Argentinian government, hey, you have some international commitments, you need to comply with those. And now, we are basically facing winter and we don't have any gas basically to heat ourselves. Unlike Europe, at least in Chile, gas is mainly used for electricity. Most of the heating is actually biomass in Chile. So mainly the problem was for electricity generation. So basically, what was the rush going into? They said, we're going to create that coal-based power in 2008, 2009, 2010. Instead of shifting things towards renewable energy, we got coal-based last decade. 61% of basically 3 gigawatts. 6,000 megawatts of solar and about 2,000 megawatts of capacity for wind. So we said, okay, this is maybe it's going to solve the problem in terms of supply of electricity, but we have the same issues still happening here. Chile doesn't produce coal, so we still need to import coal. Chile doesn't produce gas, so we need to import gas. We are, on the other hand, very rich on renewable energy. Okay? And this is where I think where we made the biggest mistake. We installed all these in the last decade, but now based on the international commitments, actually the COP27 is happening now, Chile basically defined to phase out coal completely by 2040, and in the best case, we need to phase out coal by 2030. Okay, actually the Congress is today forcing the power companies to phase out all the coal power plants in 8 more years. Okay, we already phased out 30% of the installed capacity by 2022. We phased out 30% of the installed capacity. By 2024, we are going to phase out 50% of the installed capacity, and maybe by 2030, we're going to phase out 100% of the installed capacity. So what's happening here? We have a developing economy like Chile, who installed in the last decade 60% of the installed capacity for coal-based power plant just to secure electricity generation, and now we're going to face it in 8 more years. Okay, and that's something in terms of economic cost is something that is huge for a developing economy like Chile. Actually, we did some studies, not only for Chile, but for South America in general, and the cost associated for the stranded asset is huge for developing economies in Latin America. And why this was also a wrong decision. If we see the renewable potential in Chile, we are rich. Okay? We have basically 500 gigawatts of CSP capacity, over 1,000 gigawatts of PV capacity, almost 200 gigawatts of wind capacity, 6 gigawatts of small hydro or hydro river. If we add to this hydro dam, if we add to this geothermal, although we do not promote geothermal, we have over 2,000 gigawatts of capacity based on renewable energy. Okay? And back 10 years ago, we decided to go with coal instead of promoting or incentivizing this type of technology. So that was the biggest mistake that we made. Because of this, now it comes the positive side. Okay? Potential renewable energy we have in Chile. The levelized cost of electricity towards 2050, in the best case, in the northern side, is expected to be close to $15 per megawatt hour, so it's very low. This is going to create a second good news for us, hydrogen, green hydrogen. Last year, we actually produced the first green hydrogen molecule in Chile, in the Patagonia, in the southern part, and it is expected that the cost for the levelized cost for hydrogen in Chile by 2050 is going to be below $1.5 per kilogram. So probably the cheapest green hydrogen in the world by 2050. Everything because of the rich potential for renewable sources in Chile. This basically led Chile to develop a green hydrogen policy. Basically by 2025, we are expected to have 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. By 2030, basically 25 gigawatts of electrolyzers, have the cheapest hydrogen in the world, and hopefully being able to supply some of the demand here in Europe all the way from Chile. So in summary, basically we make 2 wrong decisions, one in the 1990s, one in the 2000s. Instead of going for renewables, we went for coal when we had the opportunity to make the right decision. So that's my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Felipe. And then I would like to invite Paul, the second longest trip. It's up to you.
Thank you very much. The reason why I asked Ingo to bring up this photo is that this photo is actually taken in Danish waters. So it is something that it has been very prominent in Danish news, this little accident, or whatever we call it. What you may not know is that this actually happened on the same day that a new transmission line between Norway through Denmark to Poland was opened. And the Danish Prime Minister, she was actually at the opening ceremony in Poland when the news about this broke. And I don't think a lot of people in Denmark think that that was a coincidence. I think there was some kind of a message in this. The same if you go to some of the other cases that we have experienced in Northern Europe. For some reason, electrical cables between Scotland and the Shetland Islands, they were suddenly cut out of nowhere, more or less at the same time. So there are some peculiarities happening. You've got drones over Norwegian gas platforms in the North Sea. So there's a lot of elements introducing uncertainty, insecurity. And I think this uncertainty and this insecurity is a very important message. If we look into how the markets are reacting to natural gas crisis, well, it is as if when something like this happens, then prices, they skyrocket. Then news come out and say, oh, the European storages, they're all empty. They're all filled up for the season, no problem. And then the prices go down again. So insecurity is what is actually guiding us, what is governing, what is basically controlling a lot of what is going on in Europe right now. This was not my intended beginning, but then I saw this photo. I thought, oh, that's a nice photo from Denmark, so let me just tie up a nice little history on that one. But I do think that it also links up to what I was intent to say. Because if we look into history, we have the Yom Kippur War in the 1970s, we have the Iranian Revolution, we have the Suez Crisis in the 1950s. Those are three different events which have all put a large fingerprint on energy security in Europe. After the Yom Kippur War, prices, they quadrupled. After the Iranian War, something similar happened. So over the course of just 10 years, oil prices then went up by a factor of 10, 15, or something like that. And that is something that is happening in, I would not say an obscure corner, but compared to if you're sitting in Denmark, it is basically an obscure corner. I mean, why should a war in Israel have a large impact on Denmark? Why should the Iranian Revolution and the ensuing war between Iran and Iraq, why should that have a large impact on Denmark? But it did have. And I think our Prime Minister, she came out after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and said that energy policy has become security policy. And I thought, mind-bogglingly stupid. That is an extremely myopic point of view, because if you think that energy policy has become security policy, that means that you don't have any historical understanding of energy. You don't have any historical understanding of how things are actually transpiring. Energy policy has always been security policy. And I said the same thing on national TV the night after. I might mention, went out and said, I disagree with our Prime Minister. I say, this has always been the case, and it should always be. So I think we're just being myopic, especially in Western Europe, Northern Europe. We are used to living our nice, wealthy lives, and we have all the means and all the support and all the economics that we need, and then things like this happening. So I think we are in a situation where we are basically facing people who are operating with a different set of chess games, we could call it. I know that Putin, he's a chess player, and I think he's using chess in a different way that we're doing it. We are doing it in the myopic way. We don't have very much hindsight. Of course, now our Prime Minister in Denmark, she does show a bit of hindsight. But we are operating myopically, both looking forward, but also looking back. And if you go to what we see from the Russian motivation, if you have read the text that Putin has actually done like a small treaty on the history of Russia. I've read it. It's interesting to see the perspective where he goes back to the Swedish invading Russia was that in the 17th century, the French in the 17th century, then we've got various German invasions and so on. And if you look into the Danish history, we are not, I mean, okay, we might look back 2 years and a few years ahead in time, and then you see the Russian perspective going back 400 years and building your understanding of what is happening today, building it on that. It's not just when Ukraine was given Crimea in the 1950s. No, he's going back 300-400 years further back, and we don't do that in Northern Europe. We don't think that way. So I think that's one of the primary lessons of this entire ordeal, is that we are playing a set of chess where we don't understand the rules of the game, and we should pick up on the rules of the game and try to understand that people are operating under different sets of games or rules that we are doing. So that is my first lesson. Going on a little bit about Denmark. This one was actually corresponding to Danish natural gas consumption in 1 year. So it was 300 million or billion or whatever cubic meters. I don't count in cubic meters, I count in joules. But this was in cubic meters. It was a lot, but it was like the Danish natural gas consumption for 1 entire year. So it is someone who is playing the big stakes who did this. Of course, we don't know who has done it, but I don't have much doubt as who have done it. Anyway, it is someone playing with a different set of rules. Denmark, we are usually self-sufficient with natural gas. Apart from right now, because our gas production facility in the North Sea, it's sinking. I mean, you pump up all the gas, so your platform tends to sink. So at some point you have to rebuild it and make it a bit higher so you can stick the legs further down into the mud. Basically, we've been doing that for a year or two. So actually, right now, Denmark is also one of the takers of natural gas on the European market. And some of our politicians, they went out and said, yes, but we can just buy it in Europe. And I was thinking, okay, where do you think it comes from? Yeah, but we buy it on the German market. Yes, but where do you think it comes from? Yeah. So even among politicians today, they did not really have the understanding of how markets function. Where does the gas come from? Yes, we can buy it short-term market on the spot market in Germany, but I'm pretty sure they buy it somewhere else. As far as I know, there's not much gas production in Germany. So we have an issue also in Denmark in these days. So in Denmark, we have about 400,000 dwellings which are heated by natural gas. It's about 1/5 of our houses, which compared to many other countries is not so bad. We also have some natural gas consumption in industry, but again, it is not very high. So our main problem in Denmark, that is in fact the 400,000 dwellings. And we have 2 basic options, and both are actually fine in terms of the green transition that Ingo wants me to reflect on. Because if people, they have the stamina, and that basically in this context means you have a bit of money, then you can wait. You can wait it out, and in many of these places we will have district heating rolled out. If you don't have the stamina, or you don't have the money to wait, then you go for a heat pump. Unfortunately, those two, they are kind of at odds with one another. So if you have too many houses going for the heat pumps in an area, then you're undermining future prospects of district heating in that same area. So that is one of the problems that we are having right now. And district heating under these circumstances, it is very nice. Of course, we have some old systems which are based on gas boilers and gas CHP units, but they have already been, I wouldn't say phased out, but they have been supplemented by other technologies over the last decade or so. I went with my students to a former solely gas-fired CHP station last week only, and so they have big piston engines, but they only use it when the electricity prices are very high. Now they also have an electric boiler, so they can use that when electricity prices are low. They have an electric heat pump, same deal. They have a big solar collector for when the sun is shining. It does happen occasionally in Denmark. They have a biomass boiler. So they have a lot of different things they can play. So it really, their operation on a given day, that depends on, is the sun shining, how is the spot market price for electricity, how is the spot market price for natural gas. So that very large basket of different technologies is something that district heating can actually help us with. So one of my primary messages, that is that we should go towards district heating because you simply have more options of heating the house. If you have industries placing themselves in that town, well, then in the Danish context, that would usually mean some waste heat, and we would be able to pick it up with the district heating grid. This company, after 1 year of war, well, not 1 year, but whatever, 1 year of war in Ukraine and gas prices skyrocketing and electricity prices going up and down, what do you think the energy price, the district heating price, will increase by next year? I asked some of my colleagues, some of my younger colleagues, and even some of my older colleagues. They were guessing, oh, it might 30%, 40%, 50%. And this is compared to natural gas prices, which has gone up by, well, there we're not talking about percent, there we're talking about factors. But actually, their heating cost is going up by 2% next year. This is less than the inflation. This is in absolute terms. This is not inflation corrected. I mean, right now the inflation in Denmark is between 5 and 10% on an annual basis. So district heating is getting cheaper in this place. And this is why you have so many places where people, they are scrambling to get onto the district heating grid. Places where we have not been able to convince people to get on the district heating grid because they've been more or less on par with whatever technology they had. Well, now they all see the purpose. They see the economic purpose, they see the convenience, they see that they can be part of the transition without doing anything apart from switching the technology, and they simply see that they are more robust. There's a certain resilience when you are having a system which has multitude of different technologies they can play with. So that is very good. So district heating expansion is definitely one of the points. A second thing that we are working on is biogas. Right now, about 30% of the gas demand in Denmark is covered by biogas, and we can easily increase that. The Danish Biogas Association, I think they can double their production, and the reason why they've not done it so far is basically economics. But of course, with increasing natural gas prices, increasing focus on resilience, robustness, and this political certainty, then I think biogas is looking into a future where it will really prosper even more than it does today. Some of these gas plants are old and not necessarily connected to the to the natural gas grid. And these, of course, we need to upgrade. They should be connected to the grid. We need to expand the grid into those areas. We need to upgrade the biogas, take out the CO2, so it's methane quality basically. And that is something that we are working on doing right now. So I think it's not, with the 400,000 houses switching away and industry electrifying to the extent where it's reasonable, we might still need a little bit of fuel for some of them, and it can also be in the shape of biogas, but I don't think it's unreasonable that we can actually have 100% biogas in the Danish gas system. And then of course comes newer fuels, electrofuels, electromethane and something else, but if we're just sticking to the current situation. Our current government, they are still expanding the natural gas grid for some reason. We have a big sugar factory and I think they should be connected to natural gas. But I know that my research group, we are adamant against this. We think that if the gas grid should be expanded, then we should definitely only expand it to these biogas plants. Maybe also pick up from more smaller biogas plants and have a central methanation plant, taking out the CO2 to get higher quality, or to have natural gas quality basically. So this is where we should focus our attention. Biogas and upgrading, and then of course, bearing the new rules of the game in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And now we finish our introductory round with Neven, please.
Okay, some technical issues. Well, from the previous three speakers, we can clearly conclude that basing your security of gas supply on importing gas, 40% of your gas from very far away and from not really a friendly place is not really a very wise solution. Also, one should never be dependent on one supplier. If you have many suppliers, if you lose one, you're okay. But if you have one that covers 40% of need, then you have the energy crisis that we have now. It was always clear to experts, but I wonder, why did we corner Europe so badly? Who is responsible for that? Who did it, and how to get out of it? Power sector is not such a big issue. It has 1,100 gigawatt installed, and we have 520 gigawatt peak. So if there is no gas, we can move to other sources: coal, oil, nuclear, whichever, although of course renewables would be much better to increase the speed of integration of new renewable projects. Industry is also easier to move out of gas because, well, most of them, they have some old boilers that can burn anything, coal, oil, or things like that, hopefully. Those that do not have will face problem this winter for sure, but it's relatively easier to solve the problem because to industry you can usually bring fuel by trains or some other ways, alternative fuel. Problem is heating, because households usually don't have alternative system for heating. When you build your home, you don't build two different systems for heating. We do that in the Balkans. 50% of people in Croatia have also wood stove, just in case. Because if there is a price problem for commercial heating, you can always go to the forest and cut your own trees. But most of Europe doesn't have this opportunity, and even in the Balkans, in cities, we can't do that. So this is the problem where we are in a difficult situation, because we cannot move those households with gas boilers easily to alternative source of fuel. Well, what should we do with gas boilers? I mean, we have a climate neutral goal by 2050. Gas boilers have lifetime of 20 years. So why are we still installing gas boilers and putting us in corner even more if we want to actually remove them and replace them by some other type of heating? So in my opinion, we should stop selling gas boilers as soon as possible. We could look at the case of Nordic countries like Finland, Sweden, Norway. They never used gas boilers. They are heated on electricity and have no problem with that. Why would heating on electricity actually be a problem? In a very cold country, it's feasible, but in the Mediterranean, we have bad electricity grids. We can't do that. And so we are bringing gas from 4,000 kilometers away to heat our homes. Denmark banned new gas boilers in 2013, if I'm not wrong. Paul will correct me if I am. Netherlands banned planning new gas boilers in 2018, France in 21, Austria in 23, UK after 25. Austria is also removing all the gas boilers by 2040. Denmark is working very hard on removing gas boilers and replacing them with district heating. And the rest of Europe, well, we still subsidize gas boilers in Croatia. Can you imagine? What about hydrogen blending? Let's go to hydrogen, bring it from Chile in very inefficient tankers and put it in a gas grid, and then let's heat our homes with hydrogen. So if we put 10% of hydrogen in gas grid, we only reduce CO2 emissions by 1%. It's a pure greenwashing. I mean, are we going to go to hydrogen for heating? Not really. This is just greenwashing for the gas industry. So they can still continue to subsidize gas heating. Let's also look from the thermodynamic point of view. If I have shown this slide today, but I think it's very relevant for this panel too. If we use heat pumps for heating, either individual heat pumps or through district heating, which is much more flexible because we can replace the fuel at any time, so there is no crisis if you have district heating. We will use around 1.6 petawatt hours to supply demand of 5 petawatt hours for heating in Europe. If we go through hydrogen, we need 6 to 7 times more primary energy to satisfy heating demand. If we go through electromethane, we need 10 times more. Does it make sense? Well, thermodynamically, exergy point, economically, environmentally, it doesn't. But it's being pushed. In all papers you find, well, we could use hydrogen for heating. Well, turning on nuclear, this is very important discussion now, would actually not help very much with gas problem. Since gas problem is not electricity, gas problem is gas boilers, gas heating. Although the return of French nuclear would be very useful this winter, but we are not seeing that happening. So, in my opinion, we should ban new gas boilers in new buildings and in refurbished buildings now, as soon as possible. And we need large-scale subsidized programs to replace gas boilers with district heating and heat pumps. And we have to do it quickly, and we have to do it fully, because this energy crisis is probably just the first one in a row. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Neven. So now we have had quite long introductory notes. Even would like have more discussions here. Maybe when I try to sum up what we have heard so far, at least what could be the solution for the future, to not have any more the fossil natural gas that was mainly having district heating grids. However, they are really then fed with energy. We had the idea of biogas with heat pumps. And we have this option with hydrogen, maybe not only produced on-site here in Europe, but maybe also will be imported in future from other continents. When I have a look to my city Cologne, that wants to become climate neutral in 2040, and we discuss a lot, can we have hydrogen also for heating? And all the professors, they say, oh, it's stupid. But then the people from the city and the utility, they say, yes, but you are professors, you do not need to do it. And we need really to make the transition. And yes, it's beautiful to have a district heating grids everywhere, but it's a hell of work to expand the district heating grid in the cities. And yes, it's beautiful how efficient heat pumps are, but then we need to improve. Even our strong city grids will not do the heating of the houses. And we cannot refurbish all the houses. So my utility in my city, they still see a part of the solution, even in the heating for hydrogen. But now I would like to open first the possibility also to give your arguments here in the audience, or also may ask questions to our panelists. And then maybe when you're exhausted, I come back and ask them some questions. Is there anybody who would like to start? And we have had a micro for the audience, but I don't find it anymore. Okay. So only the people with microphones stand up. Yeah. Okay, Goran will start.
Okay, actually, Ingo, I have a question for you. Maybe you can answer. So, in Denmark, we had, or we still have, quite good technology that is providing a lot of heating, industry heating. It's solar thermal with seasonal storage. And what do you think is the reason that it was not installed in Germany so much? Because you have also quite a lot of district heating that it can be used efficiently.
Yes, we ask those questions also a lot, and we have even had panels on comparing our country with the one of Denmark. And then we came that the regulation is very different in Denmark, and also Denmark is a more rural structure. So there, the small district heating networks with the small communities, it's not easily to be compared with our more city and dense populated cities. So whenever we come up with the suggestion, why not adding a big heat storage in our cities, then they always come up, there is no space. So, or we have space in places where there is no district heating grid. So it's a topic of just implementation of those very big heat storages. That is one of the arguments. Paul is argue against. But then you need to build pipes of 20 kilometers, yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah. Just one question, because, I mean, to me, as also Neven said, to experts, it was clear that this was just a time of peace, let's call it this way, because since the oil crisis in the 70s, it was clear that energy self-sufficiency was important. So what happened? Is it just we have a short memory, or there is something else happen, and how to avoid it for the next time? Thanks.
Shall I maybe? Well, it reminds me on a way how to cook a frog. If you put a frog in boiling water, it will jump out. If you put frog in cold water, it will get cooked. I think we were cooked slowly, step by step, and expertly. Yes, for me it was the sign of emergency problem, after which I would just completely change policy towards gas. I would immediately ban gas heating after that 2009 crisis. But European politicians ignored that completely.
And the consequences of that crisis were, the impact of that crisis in 2009 was bigger than now. Not looking only to price.
In Southeast Europe, yes, but the rest of Europe was not so much touched by it, because the only pipeline that was closed was Ukrainian.
And we had plans for Nabucco back then, and nothing happened.
Which was blocked?
Yes.
By whom? We were cooked slowly.
But Neven, the frog has always been cooked very slowly. But now we are really thrown into hot water. But do you see that we are now acting?
Well, we are not thrown in the hot water. We are already so cooked that we cannot jump out. This is a problem because we have so much gas heating. You cannot remove it in a year time. So we are going to get really badly damaged by that. I hope we manage to communicate with people that this winter we have to have lower temperatures. I'm not sure are you going to manage in Germany.
I'm quite relaxed for this winter. Even the people are not saving energy. Every day we follow the state of charge of the gas storages in our country, and that is now 97% filled. But it's a bit a wrong safety because so far we always have had the gas storages filled almost completely, but additionally we had a permanent flow from Russia.
Yes, now there
so
is
therefore
no flow.
it's a bit different, but nevertheless the first winter definitely should not be a problem.
If it stays warm, we're okay. But if it gets cold, we will have to shut down industry, mostly.
Just to get back to the question about whether we are running into the same kind of issues again, I think we probably are in other senses. I mean, I think our political system is simply not up to the task of planning decades ahead and making unpopular decisions. And I'm not saying that we should move towards some of the systems that are good at that. But I'm just saying I think it's one of the characters of democratic political societies that there is this tendency.
We had a lot of plans for pipelines, for example, for diversification of gas supply in Europe, and none of that have happened. This is strictly to politicians, not to engineers, because there are sources, because three.
Well, we were building a pipeline from Middle East, and there was only 50 kilometers missing from the north of Syria to Turkey when Putin called Assad and told him to stop. So we are obviously not good at building pipelines anymore. So we should switch to local energy sources.
A colleague next to you also has a comment, and then Antonio.
Ivan Smajla, University of Zagreb. I wanted to talk about the subsidies. I understand that maybe Western Europe countries have more money and it's easier for them to go to district heating system, and I totally agree with Professor Dujic, which you said we need to phase out the gas boilers and everything, but where do we find the money in the poorer part of Europe? That's the big thing. For example, let's say my flat has 50 square meters. If I wanted to switch to heat pump, I need 7,000–8,000 euros to do that, and it's a lot of investment for me. I would rather repair my old boiler again and again and again for next 5 or 10 years.
Okay, how much would gas cost if you were paying the market price and it was not subsidized? 5 times more? Yeah.
No.
So you would pay back your heat pump in a 3-year time, approximately. But you are being subsidized, and for you it's okay that you're subsidized to continue using gas, but you think it's not acceptable to get subsidized to switch to more sustainable heating? I think that we will need to have some subsidies to move quickly to alternative heating systems, because otherwise it will be difficult to do it in an organized way. But this amount of money, it's really not very difficult to find. You know, Croatia got quite a lot of money for this funding, post-COVID funding, but where are we putting that money?
Subsidies. Subsidies for natural gas in households.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
No, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's burning the money.
Just a short comment for this natural gas subsidies. It's coming out of the allowances that were sold on auctions for the Republic of Croatia, not from the post-COVID fund. So the emitters that emit CO2 are paying the households for their natural gas.
Let us bring the Italian perspective into the Croatian discussion.
Not only the Italian, well, personal probably. One point I think to be discussed is with regard to the position of EU on the energy platform for the future. Because we are starting to discuss about a joint defense at EU level. But when we attempt to face such challenges, we can see that, rules are completely different from, for a country from another. Of course, we have different public finance margins, and so we can act different policies. Today, Professor Carvalho talked about the need to, manage all these critical phase, not introducing a distortion in the internal market. So I think it is time to make an effort for a multidimensional impulse to the European Union. I don't think the European Union could pass such and future similar crisis if it doesn't find a way to share deeply some of the most critical issues and to share strategies, avoiding these, very common pictures with single councillors going to manage directly for their supply. We must, make a step ahead towards some European strategy. This is one point, in my opinion, very important. The second point regards the how cheap we expect and hope to have energy in the future. Because I think one of the reasons for which the frog was cooked is because we had very cheap energy from Russia. And in my opinion, this also discouraged or reduced the attention to the topic of energy saving. We can experience in this moment in Italy, for instance, we are discussing on how much good practices and some minor technological efforts could lead to reduce consumption in the very short period. So why this didn't happen in the last year? Because of cheap energy, maybe too cheap. Of course, competing on the global market requires, competing with the Chinese and, several countries, of course, which have cheap energy and cheap prices of products. But maybe the idea to solve the problem and again come back in a world where electricity, energy is so cheap that you shouldn't care of saving it is not so correct.
Well, it's in my opinion, it's completely crazy that a typical family pays more times for a mobile phone than for energy. One dinner costs sometimes more than the bill, monthly bill for energy. It doesn't make sense. We should definitely increase the cost of energy, and anybody who doesn't have a mobile phone should have his energy subsidized. Everybody else should pay the market price. And we have market functioning well, but then we are protecting residential market against the real price.
We have now Peter and then two raising hands over there.
Okay. I guess you should also.
Do I need to switch it? Okay. But you hear me?
No, and it goes online, so you have to turn it on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's on. I think it's good to start from that initial question which was on the slide. Okay, I wouldn't fully agree just ban or scrap boilers. They're built already. we just need something new or repurpose the boilers. But going back to the initial question, I think we should use this opportunity because cheap gas is over. Who is guilty, who is not guilty, it doesn't matter, it's over. We should use this opportunity to build new ways of supplying energy. And coming back to what you were saying, sourcing energy locally. I fully agree. We're just now doing a project with Krakow. They have, and it's not a big science. It just needs to be implemented. Simple PVT panels with underground storage. And for gas prices in May, the break-even was 4 years. And now it's already probably 3 years. So why not? Krakow municipality is going crazy to replicate the project already.
Yes.
Okay, was a short comment by
I would
Neven.
like to say a few words about the. First of all, I was not aware of this very high subsidization you have in Croatia, and I'm really surprised that you really. Is this really the best way that you can waste your money in Croatia? I mean, I could find a lot of better ways to waste your money if you wanted to waste your money. I mean, this is really short-sighted. So, of course, it's impossible to compete against something which is subsidized as heavily as natural gas apparently is in Croatia. I hope that is stopped soon. Anyway, at Aalborg University, we've made I know that I'm peddling district heating, but we've made analysis of all European countries, and we have found what is the potential for district heating, looking into. And we have not looked into subsidized energy, sorry. We've just looked into what is actually the economical optimum. And I can't remember what it is for Croatia, but it's definitely not zero. And for most European countries, I mean, even if you go to what you would normally, sometimes people will think of district heating as being, oh, that's something that fits in cold Northern Europe. But actually, no. I mean, it even fits in Madrid, it fits in Rome, it fits in many places also of a more temperate climate. So it is not the solution to everything because it takes time to implement. You have to make a lot of renovations. You have to dig trenches and lay pipes and so on. So it's not an easy thing, but it is definitely a long-term solution. But it cannot compete against subsidized natural gas. So I hope that is one of the first steps that will be taken in Croatia and probably also elsewhere. I mean, if it applies in Croatia, then I guess it also applies elsewhere. I hope that is one of the first steps that will be taken, is that you remove that subsidy, or rather you put a footnote on it saying something like, okay, you can get subsidy for this period if you do this or something, so that it's not directly linked into the natural gas, but the weaning off the natural gas, to use the word wean that Nevin used earlier today. Like when you have a child who's used to getting milk, then you have to wean them off at some point. And it seems that you have to be weaned off cheap natural gas in Croatia. I don't know how quickly you can do it, but the money must be, you should be able to find better uses for the money than that.
Let's bring in Raphael with the Swiss perspective.
Yes, the first is more of a comment. So we are engineers and we normally think, or we were led to believe that big and centralized is good. But now we are realizing that after all, small and local and decentralized is after very interesting. So for me, it will pose more logistics and supply chain question rather than something else at the moment. But I also believe, in twisting a bit the scope, is that the supply chains will change. So now we have coal, natural gas. We are worried about Russia and about all of this. But in a few years, cobalt, zinc, lithium, and a set of materials that we are heavily dependent on the red country, on China, right? And not only China, but Australia, Chile, USA, in which Europe needs somehow to prepare, because otherwise this problematic will come from another totalitarian regime or a dictatorship regime. So how do you see it? So, yeah.
I fully agree with you. There's definitely an issue there with rare earth metals, where you also have a monopoly situation. There were some mines in the US, but they were actually sold to Chinese companies, as far as I know. There are opportunities in Greenland, actually, but they're not being developed because prices are not high enough. So we are in a situation where you have a monopoly situation, and we're running into the same problem there.
But it's not the same problem. It's a very different problem. You need gas every single day. It has to come 4,000 kilometers from Siberia to your home gas boiler. With lithium, with cobalt, with nickel, with all other materials, we actually need them only to produce equipment. We don't need them on a daily basis. Once you have produced equipment, it will generate for 20 years. So you have 20 years to develop new mines in other areas. Also, batteries can be done in this way or that way. There is very few materials that are not replaceable. If we cannot produce cobalt in a socially acceptable way in Democratic Republic of Congo, we can move to LiFePO batteries and just avoid using cobalt. And then the problem is solved. So it's a completely different issue. There is an issue, and we will have bottlenecks, so we have to work on it. There is a currently limited supply of some of the materials. We have to increase the production of those materials, but it's not the same problem as fossil fuels.
And when we don't burn them, we could bring it in a circular economy. But now
also
we would go, I think, beyond the topic of heating with Thomas from Austria.
Hi. So here we are discussing the future of gaseous fuels, right? So I'm pretty sure that the future of those fuels is not in heating, and I think we agree on that. So there will be a super huge demand of gaseous fuels, or at least direct fuel in industry. We will have a certain demand of gaseous fuels for power production when there is, some Dunkelflaute. We will have some minor demands of some fuels in transport. And yes, of course, there will be a need of hydrogen for those demands, of course. We face in Europe the problem that we have a very densely populated area, so potentials for renewable energy is restricted. I'm pretty sure that we will not supply those demands out of our own production. So probably there is also in future the need for energy imports for exactly that demands. So I want you to comment on that. We have our colleague from Chile here. We have spoken, or you have spoken in your introduction, in hydrogen derivatives, for instance, in iron and steel industry. So this is, I would think, also a quite interesting part of the discussion. And I personally see this discussion more interesting as the discussion on using hydrogen for heating or so. This is nonsense. Thank you on your comments.
Felipe?
Felipe, you would like to answer?
No, just a quick comment. Actually, I was telling Neven yesterday that Chile and Germany already have a memorandum of understanding for importing green hydrogen from Chile, actually to the Hamburg port. So it was signed last year.
Yes, but maybe we could broaden now the perspective from our Eurocentric view and bring Felipe a bit more into the game. And also when we go away from the heating aspect that we need, or today we also use the gas as a basis a lot for our chemical industry. And also that we could substitute by electricity and the hydrogen basic. But then it is increasing the demand a lot when we not only substitute the energy demand, but also the base product demand. And I would like to ask Felipe, you have shown you can produce the cheapest hydrogen all over the world. I believe you will do it. But in which way do you transport it then, for example, to Europe? And is it then again a cheap way? Or do we find maybe in Europe cheaper ways when we also take the conversion chains until it arrives here in Europe?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. So actually, I mean, one way is shipping, right? And as I just said, there are already some agreements for shipping green, or basically memorandum of understanding for shipping green hydrogen in the future to Europe. And what the colleague said, actually, something that we discuss in Chile a lot, is that probably in Europe there are maybe some places where you can actually install additional green capacity, renewable energy for producing green hydrogen, but most likely Europe will have a limit, so it will have to come from somewhere, and that's where not only Chile comes into place. The same discussion we have in Chile, you can find it in Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, Australia, so several places. So it's not only probably coming from South America, there are a bunch of other places that maybe they won't provide green hydrogen as cheap as Chile, but it's still very affordable. A different idea that actually we were discussing on dinner on, when was it? I think on Sunday. I forgot the name of these cables for transporting.
HVDC.
Yes, exactly. So maybe intercontinental transfer of electricity, so we can produce electricity in Chile, solar, wind energy, send it somewhere else, have desalination plants maybe here in Europe, produce green hydrogen here from electricity coming from different places. So that might be also a different alternative.
I again look to the audience. Somebody want to react on that? Somebody on the panel?
Well, if we build an optimized system, yes, we will need lots of gaseous fuels. I fully agree with that. But it will be around 40% of primary energy will go for hydrogen production, which will then cover industrial needs and feedstock needs. So it's not such a huge increase. We will need to increase the production of electricity by 3 times probably to electrify heating, transport, produce enough hydrogen and cover our needs. It's not tremendous jump. If we do the other way, the way a gas industry wants us to replace all the gas with hydrogen, then we will need 10 times more. So if we do it in an optimized way, it's not so much.
If I can just add a little bit on that. Of course, different countries, they have different spatial opportunities, and I know that in Denmark we're privileged because we have a relatively low population density and we have a nice big chunk of the North Sea where we have very large offshore wind farms and we are developing further in gigawatt scale. So we of course have some options in that respect. On the other hand, there are other countries where the sun shines considerably more than it does in Denmark. So even though it might not be the perfect option to have wind turbines here, although I've only seen one so far here on Cyprus, but it's...
There are two.
There are two,
one near Paphos and the other near Larnaca.
Okay, so I saw one of them. Okay, I saw 50% of the wind turbines on Cyprus. But there's definitely room for large-scale PV panels here, and maybe Cyprus can export. It doesn't have to be hydrogen, it can be any kind of renewable energy-based fuel to some of the countries, which, I mean, I can't imagine Luxembourg or maybe the Netherlands with their high population densities. I can imagine them having some problems in terms of spatial availability for PV panels and wind turbines. So different countries have different options. So I still see also in the future there will be trade of these liquid or gaseous renewable energy fuels. So we don't all have to be local. Of course, it's nice to be local, but such fuels can also come from a variety of different suppliers and thereby also giving a little bit of certainty. So if one supply chain is derailed, then Chile will still be supplying. So the same with the coal-based, I mean, in Denmark we are looking at different options, Colombia, Venezuela, South Africa, Canada, US for coal supplies. We used to export or import from Russia, but we have stopped doing that.
Okay, we have 3 more remarks here, here, and here.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much. On your comment about needing to import to certain places, I have a colleague who is focuses his research on Singapore, and that's exactly the issue they're encountering, right? With limited land mass, very dense, energy-hungry population. And so that's something that's often on my mind in terms of these large interconnections. I'm also Canadian, and I study in the UK. So being from I'm from an island in Canada, and I also see the same potential for a lot of things like you're saying, HVDC, that could be mutually beneficial. But what I wanted to actually get your opinions on was the role of North Africa in potentially helping this security in Europe or not. With COP in Egypt right now, that's probably on the top of everyone's mind to a certain extent. I've done some research looking at Morocco as a potential partner for some of the needs of our transition away from natural gas with their concentrated solar power or other ways of generating hydrogen and things like that. So your takes on North Africa and those relationships.
You want?
Yeah, I agree on you, and I think your example with Singapore was a lot better than the examples that I had with Luxembourg and the Netherlands. They are nowhere near a match in terms of spatial availability or lack of spatial availability as Singapore is. So you're quite right with that example. That's much better. So yes, I do foresee that countries with good either wind resources or good solar resources, that they have an opportunity here. I mean, even Denmark, we're looking into actually exporting liquid fuels in the future. That at least is our plan, based on renewable energy from the North Sea, and I can't see why other countries shouldn't be doing the same based on whatever availability they have of renewable energy sources.
Yeah, I think then we are also in the sustainability criteria of the hydrogen. I also see that the North African countries, they have excellent resources on solar and wind. But their own energy system is still completely relying on fossil fuels. And so why should we have green hydrogen importing from countries where they, in their own country, still rely on that? So we have different sustainability criteria, and then maybe the cheapest option in North Africa is not the best choice.
Maybe. We should, of course, trade. That's good, but we should never again be dependent on one country on 40% of our imports. And there is another issue. What is the best way to import energy? And I'm not sure. I haven't seen any research into that. There are many options, but what Felipe mentioned, cables might be more efficient than shipping hydrogen. Because shipping hydrogen is much more difficult than shipping natural gas, but it might be feasible. I don't know. I haven't seen research. But there is another option that is being thought about. It's ammonia. If you convert hydrogen in ammonia, then the shipping cost is hugely smaller, and you can ship it and then convert it back to hydrogen if you need it. So we have options, and we will see what happens. But you people here have to do more research on that. I would love to see a paper comparing different options.
When talking about the spatial problem, I would like to know your opinions on using geothermal energy. We haven't talked about that in Europe, at least at this panel. And we know the geothermal doesn't take up much space, and lots of areas in Europe has a good potential for using it. So what about geothermal power plants?
Well, if I may, if you have geothermal resource which is up to 120 degrees, it's good for heating. So district heating with geothermal is an excellent option in maybe 25% of Europe. But for electricity, you need to have 150 degrees, and then it's still very expensive. It's cheaper than gas electricity now, but it's much more expensive than wind and solar. So I'm not really sure about, you need to have 350 degrees to have viability of geothermal electricity.
Actually, one more comment here. So in Chile, we also do have a huge potential for geothermal. So we actually, because of the and these mountain chains and volcanoes, well, it's huge. I don't know the actual reason, but for some reason the Chilean government doesn't promote this type of technology. They actually decide to go with wind and solar. Solar have become so much cheaper, solar panels, wind as well. And in our particular case, it is also a thing with security. So Chile is a huge, earthquake country, so there is a security aspect that we also need to take into account.
Go on.
I would like to go back on your first photo, maybe. And Paul, you were through the laughing, you were saying something about disconnecting the cables or blowing up these natural gas pipelines, but maybe it was more fear than real laughing. Are we in open season for getting the infrastructure blown up that brings energy to the Europe? I don't know. This is just a question.
I don't think so. But I think your guess is as good as mine.
Depends who did it. If the West did it, then it's open. If Russia did it, then it's not open. There is no way to protect them.
That's a big issue right now with all the cable owners, especially. I mean, that's a big issue in Northern Europe because a lot of our cables, they are actually underwater, pipelines, cables, whatever. So there's a lot of discussion on that. Yeah, well, that's for energy, but we have other cables, like internet cables.
So we go to Raphael once more, and then we have their remark, and here Peter.
I was wondering on is 100% renewable Europe, and I really do agree. So you have seen 50% of Cyprus winds offshore, right? Which means that probably Cyprus is not, or wind won't take it in Cyprus, and solar will, and in Denmark we will have wind offshore. So although I really agree with this truly fraternal approach in which some produce one kind of electricity or one kind of resource, the other produce other, I do anticipate a lot of social disruption. So I've seen it with Brexit, and we have seen a lot of separatist movements. So we are not a federal state, right? So we know that in the states, I don't know, the state of Texas, I don't know, it's subsidized by the state of New York because they are a country, and it works like this. In Europe, it's not the case. So we have big social disparities, big social gaps that I do believe will be very hard to conciliate in the near future. And we really need a strong political message in which we accept that some countries are just not fortunate enough to produce as much as the others produce, and there needs to be a redistribution of wealth, but also of energy vectors. So I think this is, for me, one of the biggest challenges that we will need to address.
I strongly agree with you. The frog is already mostly cooked, and if we manage to save the frog, that will be a huge success. I'm afraid this winter will bring us quite a lot of social discomfort, conflict, and I'm not sure how this is going to end. But I don't see alternative way, or, well, is it really an alternative way just to capitulate and become a protectorate of a bully? Is this alternative? I mean, we will have to fight street wars this winter, and we as scientists, we have to fight media wars. We have to go to social networks, to media, and explain situation coldly, based on arguments, being attacked with all kinds of trolls, etc. And we have to survive. The alternative is not very nice.
We are cooking too many frogs tonight. Here's next.
Thank you. I think I want to move the conversation from another of the main point that was in the first slide. So how this crisis is going to impact the future, the energy transition. So now I would say some of my thoughts, then I would be interested to hear yours as well. So I think that renewables are benefiting from this. So all the economics are getting better, so we don't need carbon taxes anymore. And what the carbon taxes were trying to do, the gas prices, the oil prices are doing it by themselves. So that's good on that side. I'm not sure how the hydrogen will react to this, because I saw that, in my opinion, the development of hydrogen was very much related to the use of gas that was considered as a transition vector, and hydrogen that could be blended with it was a strong point of it, in my opinion, but not so strong. I mean, there are also other ways to use it, so maybe it will go on without any difference. And the other technology that I think it's very interesting is the carbon capture, that for some time I thought it was kind of essential to the future energy system, because it could save a lot of money from all the flexibility providers, the demand response, power to X, and all those technologies that we talk about all the time. But now carbon capture is seeing very dark time, I think, and I was interested in hearing your thoughts as well. Thanks.
I just want to say, so I agree with the point on CCS, but disagree on the point with carbon taxes or carbon trade markets or different alternatives. I think like maybe today, yes, the gas price has increased, so it might play the role of a tax, but I don't know how long this is going to last, and we want this to be sustainable in the future. So not for the next 1, 2, 3 years, but longer in the period. And then on the CCS case, I think it makes sense only if you basically mix it with biomass. So you can actually go towards net negative emissions. If you have CCS to keep having coal and gas, and we're not going to get rid of the fossil fuels. So if you want to have CCS, I would fully agree, but with biomass.
Well, if the price was correct, we might have developed CCS, but nobody is actually working on that because everybody sees it's not going to get anywhere. We might have it, we might need it for biomass because we will need carbon in our future economy and we will have to get it from somewhere. So it will be maybe CCU and etc. But I don't really see now CCS developing. Hydrogen will come on its own. What is happening now is a hydrogen hype. I spent together with Professor Carvalho many millions of research money in 2000s on hydrogen. We built on Porto Santo second on-grid hydrogen power plant in the world after Norwegian Utsira. And it was a hype then, and it's hype now. Hydrogen is coming after 2030 when we will have huge excesses of variable renewables. Then we will have to use it somehow, and on the other hand, we will have hard to decarbonize industry that will need this hydrogen. So we are going too early into that. Of course, it's important to think we need to develop cheap electrolyzers. We need to start developing fuels for future, which are going to be hydrogen-based, but we will not be seeing huge amounts of hydrogen tomorrow.
So we've looked to the time. We have 2 last remarks or questions, and then we go to the final round.
Okay, let me go back. I think jumping to worldwide trade flows, especially for hydrogen, it's not realistic, and I think it's just a waste of money, a waste of energy, a waste of everything. The only worst thing is to rely completely on, say, China being the factory of the world, because we are losing capability, competence, and it's thermodynamically crazy to just bring hydrogen and blend it to burn it. Makes no sense. I agree, hydrogen will come on its own. Actually, we had this discussion with Ibrahim Dinchar, and he put it very rightly. Hydrogen is good as a feedstock. To burn it, it's a crime.
Was a comment somebody wants to react, or I give the micro to the next speaker?
Next speaker. Yep. I fully agree with Peter.
I would just like to comment what you said about CCS. So it's not a novel technology. So maybe a lot of people here think it's a novel technology that appeared in several years, but it's a technology that's here for decades, not years, decades. And the only reason why it's not hugely deployed it's because it was not financially viable enough for the operators to deploy it. So Chevron had big plans in Australia to store huge amounts of CO2. They got the funds, but at the end they didn't do nothing. They did something, but basically nothing. Why? Because it was cheaper for them to emit, not to store it, and that's it. And maybe if we subsidized CCS back in the days, now we would not be talking about CO2 emissions, these huge ppms that we saw this morning. Maybe we should just talk about geopolitical reasons and why we have expensive energy.
When we calculated what would be the financial viability of CCS some 20 years ago, we were thinking about 30 euros per megawatt, per ton, sorry. That it should be giving viability to CCS. Now we have 100 and it's still not viable. So I think that companies don't really see any future viability, because there is another problem. Because of variability of wind and solar, you will be pushing out base loads out of the power system. And the only possible viability where we were seeing it was coal. And there will be no coal, because coal will never be able to compete with in a system where you need flexibility. So it will just not happen. I don't see it in the power system in any transition. Yes, cement, there I see it, of course. For the process CO2, that's obviously, there will be a necessity for CCS. And we will also need carbon for feedstocks. So once we remove fossil fuels, we will have to get this carbon somewhere from. But this is CCU.
I think there is another point that we need to consider. So when we look at the IPCC reports, most of the scenarios that actually reach 1.5, they rely on CCS. And they rely on CCS basically because we don't need to be carbon neutral, we need to be carbon negative, hopefully by 2050 or 2060. Carbon neutral is only going to be maybe 2.5 if we're lucky. But to be 1.5 in 2100, we need to be carbon net negative. And for that, we might need CCS. So maybe CCS is expensive today, but maybe if we need it by 2040, 2050, we still have some time to make it cheaper and economically viable. In some scenarios, yes. Yeah. But then
not
I
fossil
think,
fuel.
Yeah, but I think but it will make sense again, like Neven said, with biomass, not with gas or coal.
Yeah, just to add that, of course, we have the utilization issue, and we need to have negative emissions and so on. But also, at some point, we would probably also need to actually take some carbon and store it without utilization. So I agree on that. But it's maybe not the first step. That is like the last step. So we have definitely cheaper options right now for lowering CO2 emissions. So, but later on, we might reach that level also.
What is a moderator doing when we come to the end and he should summarize what we have discussed now, and he has no idea how to summarize that diverse discussion? That's the reason why we have 3 experts on the podium. So I just ask them for their closing remarks, and it's open. Who would like to start?
You have the microphone already?
Okay, Felipe started on the beginning, I can start now. Well, I think I'm very actually glad that this discussion is happening because we are moving forward very quickly with gas. Only 5 years ago, we were dreaming about the big future of gas, so we would be completely cooked in our frog story. Now we are finally understanding that gas is not a transitional fuel, that its transition, if it ever existed, already finished. We will need a lot of gas until 2050, but we have to find solutions to quickly decrease the consumption of gas and also to remove it from sectors in which they create security of supply problem like heating and use the remaining gas where we need it in industry for balancing power system at the moment. And if we do use it for heating, then we should use it in district heating as cogeneration because that's more efficient and it's more flexible. We can replace it with other fuel at any time. So no gas boilers. This is my main message. This is our first step in order to improve our future.
So I have, just take this one. I have two main points. The first main point is that natural gas as electricity is a precious fuel. And we should treat it as a precious fuel. It's not hydrogen, but still it's a precious fuel, and we are not treating it as such in the systems today. And in the future, we would need to designate some specific uses for it, something that provides flexibility or something that provides a service that cannot be provided in any other reasonable manner. So we shouldn't use it for anything or everything basically just because we have it. We should use it for some specific purposes where it's, if not unavoidable, but then at least highly practical. And of course, as I said before, it should not be natural gas, but it should probably be biogas or whatever other options we have for electrofuels in the future. Secondly, I think we should take care that we do not make any investments today that are doing with a very short-term problem in mind. So we shouldn't go out and invest in new coal-fired power stations, for instance. That it's not beyond my imagination that some countries would do that. I don't have a problem with Germany extending the lifetime of a coal-fired power station. Even in my own town, we have a coal-fired power station which is intended to close down in 28, and it's not really beyond my imagination that they might expand that for a few years just to see when things calm down. And I don't have a big problem with that, but we should definitely not go out and spend billions of whatever currency we are discussing in new production technology that will tie us for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So make sure that we do things that are in line with our other objectives, our environmental objectives, and not simply out of security of supply objectives. So don't create some sunk cost that will torment us for the next decades or half a century even. Thank you.
So I want to finish with a thought on a different perspective, so not economically, but more from the climate perspective. When shale gas happened in the US, they were talking a lot about natural gas as a bridge for carbon neutrality. But it's been shown in several papers that it's actually not true. And the main reason is because the global warming potential of gas is significantly higher than the global warming potential of coal or different fuels. So using gas is not going to help us to get to carbon neutrality. It's just going to maybe make it worse. So if we need to get rid of gas, maybe this is the moment. And don't make the mistake we did in Chile twice. In the 90s and in the 2000s. Like, we could have gone in a different direction with renewables, but we believe in economics. We went for the cheapest option at that point, and now we're paying maybe the price. So yeah, from the climate perspective, getting rid of gas is maybe a good option. Maybe is the good option, and from economically speaking, there might be better alternatives at this point.
So thank you very much. I would like to thank the audience for the lively discussions you had, and I would like that we have an applause for our three panelists who and now it's time to find a place for dinner. So have a good night.
Thank you. So we meet at the reception.